Anyone who studied the Pacific War to any real extent has heard of Mogami, Japan's unluckiest cruiser, infamous for collisions and an unfortunate friendly fire incident. This has somewhat disguised how unlucky her sister ships could be. There was Kumano, the only ship Halsey felt sorry for. And of course, there was Mikuma, the first Japanese cruiser lost in the war, and the victim of one of Mogami's collisions. I've covered Mikuma before, though that was a good bit ago now, so today's video won't be looking at her entire service history. No, this video will instead focus on Mikuma's sinking, a story that came on June 5th and June 6th, 1942. The night of June 5th saw the four Mogamis under Admiral Takeo Kurita, yes, that Kurita of Leyte Gulf fame, sailing ahead. They had been assigned to bombard Midway itself and actually got quite close. As the rest of the Japanese fleet suffered, Kurita's squadron continued on. They would ultimately get less than 50 nautical miles, 92 kilometers away, though this wasn't actually intentional. Shattered Sword even speculates that they got a bit closer. Either way, late in the previous night, Admiral Yamamoto finally threw in the towel. Midway had been a defeat, with the Kido Butai mauled by American air power. Continuing on was a risk the Japanese couldn't afford. An order went out to cancel the Midway occupation and by extension the bombardment. However, this order didn't go right for the Japanese. Cruiser Division 7, the four Mogamis, didn't get it at first. It was sent to Cruiser Division 8 instead, and it took hours to get this mishap sorted out, by which point Kurita had closed in on Midway. The order came through around 2:30 a.m. on June 5th. Now being ordered to turn back when so close to the target was a bitter pill to swallow. Nonetheless, the Japanese cruisers turned to retreat. A part of me wonders if Kurita was thinking about this at Leyte Gulf 2 years later. Regardless, Cruiser Division 7 turned away. This would prove to be an unlucky turn in more ways than one. Around 2:15 a.m., the group had been spotted by the American submarine USS Tamber. The sub couldn't fully make out what she had seen in the darkness. The captain, Lieutenant Commander John Murphy, hesitated to radio a notice for this reason. There was the potential that he had sighted American ships. This wasn't helped by Tamber losing sight of the Japanese ships, only regaining contact at 2:38. Not because of a successful pursuit, but because Kurita had turned directly at Tamber. The submarine was due north of the original path, and Kurita had moved his squadron to the north to retreat. In an impressive display of target acquisition, a lookout on Kumano sighted the submarine, a small target in the darkness that might have evaded attention. And in most circumstances, this would have been a very good thing. The submarine was sighted with time to evade any potential torpedoes and mess with attack options. However, this proved to be unfortunate instead. The sudden sighting of a submarine threw Kurita's formation into utter chaos. Kumano immediately signaled an alert and ordered an evasive turn to port. Kumano then cut an incredibly sharp turn, almost directly due west. She would widen the turn to a more northwesterly course, but the initial sharp maneuver caused some problems. Because directly behind Kumano, Suzuya made a far less sharp turn. a 45-degree turn to port, which sent her directly at Kumano. This forced Suzuya to make a turn to starboard to avoid hitting her sister ship. Suzuya would sail through Kumano's wake, narrowly avoiding clipping her sister's stern. Unfortunately, Mikuma would follow Suzuya into this turn. It was done to avoid Kumano as well, but it left her directly in Mogami's path. The fourth cruiser in line had turned sharply, much like Kumano. However, as the rest of the line smoothed out, Mogami tried to do the same. This put her directly into Mikuma's line of passage. In the darkness, it was only at the very last moment that Mikuma appeared off Mogami's bow. To the credit of her captain, Soji Akira, Mogami tried to turn to port. But it was too late. Mikuma's captain, Sakayama Shako, similarly didn't see Mogami until the final second. Mikuma continued along, and Mogami's desperate turn only succeeded in avoiding a worse impact. Mogami would hit Mikuma almost directly under the bridge. Thanks to the turn, it was more of a glancing blow instead of a direct collision. Had it not been for the turn, Mogami might have cut clean into Mikuma's amidships section, somewhat like Prince Eugen did to Leipzig a couple years later. As it is, Mogami's impact was relatively light, as light as a heavy cruiser moving at 28 knots could ever be. This collision crumpled Mogami's bow, basically destroying the lightly built structure. The bow had hit Mikuma's armor belt, and only one thing could win. It certainly wouldn't be the light bow, not when impacting heavy armor plate. As a result, Mogami's bow was ruined almost back to the number 1 turret. 40 feet of the bow was gone, torn back to port. Unsurprisingly, Mogami was dead in the water after this, drifting back from Mikuma. Her sister, meanwhile, fared better. The aforementioned armor plating protected her from severe damage. Mikuma's side was driven in a bit, but it was nothing that couldn't be repaired in dry dock. However, that relatively light damage did come with one issue. A fuel tank had been punctured. Shattered Sword cites a gash 20 meters long and 6 meters wide, 65 feet and 19 feet respectively. That fuel leak would become an issue as time went on. For the moment, though, the situation was, if not under control, at least workable. Kurita, worried about potential attack, Tamber was still skulking about, ordered Kumano and Suzuya to continue on. They left at high speed, while the other two followed at a slower pace. Mikuma, leaking fuel or not, was mostly fine. She would be ordered to escort the not fine Mogami out of the danger zone. A dangerous proposition, as Mogami could only make 12 knots, and even then, the cruiser could barely steer properly due to the crumpled bow. Aboard Mogami during all of this, the damage control teams proved quite adept at their job. Defying the usual meme about Japanese damage control, they shored up the damage and kept the cruiser going, while at the same time throwing anything that could catch fire overboard. A safety precaution that even extended to the torpedoes. This is something that needs noted because Mikuma's damage control teams would not do the same. In light of her minimal damage, it was seen as unnecessary to ditch the torpedoes. Maybe in most circumstances, that could have been true. This time, it would prove to be a poor choice, though that couldn't have been apparent at the time. Meanwhile, Tamber only gave a firm sighting report about enemy cruisers around 4:37 a.m. on June 5, 1942, after a series of distinctly less helpful messages about many unidentified ships. In part due to a lacking report from the submarine, Mogami and Mikuma managed to limp away undetected at first. They would only be sighted a couple hours after Tamber's last report, at 6:30 in the morning, when a PBY Catalina spotted Mikuma's oil slick. A second one confirmed the report, describing 2 damaged capital ships. This didn't escape Japanese attention, of course. Mikuma's captain knew they had been spotted. However, he refused to abandon Mogami despite Mikuma being capable of her full speed, or near enough anyway. The sisters, Mogami and Mikuma, would face any American attack together, something they would soon have to put to the test as Midway sent out its remaining operational dive bombers, a dozen aircraft split between Dauntlesses and Vindicators. The Dauntlesses struck first, diving out of the sun at 10,000 feet. The Marine Aviators planted their bombs alongside Mogami due to fierce Japanese anti-aircraft fire. Meanwhile, the Vindicators opted for Mikuma instead. In this attack, as I covered in my Vindicator video, Captain Richard Fleming led a glide bombing attack. Fleming would be shot down during this, crashing into the water, not into Mikuma as is sometimes claimed. Regardless, both the Dauntlesses and Vindicators failed to hit their mark, something that applied to a further attack by 8 B-17s soon after. None of the American bombers managed a single hit, and to add insult to injury, Mogami even managed to get up to 14 knots during this. No further attacks would come until the next day, June 6, 1942. Mikuma and Mogami would be reacquired by American scouts around 6:45 a.m. on June 6th. Admiral Spruance would send out an attack, though admittedly on the basis of a misidentified sighting of a carrier. Either way, an attack group was put together on USS Hornet, 25 SBDs and 8 Wildcats for 33 aircraft. This group would come upon Mikuma and Mogami around 9:30 in the morning, and after a failed attempt to find better targets, they began their dive at 9:50, something that didn't go particularly well at first. 2 Dauntlesses would be lost to Japanese anti-aircraft fire. Mikuma once more avoided any hits. Mogami, meanwhile, was hit by 2 bombs, one of which killed the entire crew of Turret 5. The other set off fires in the torpedo room, which was, as noted, empty. That precaution had paid off. Meanwhile, the destroyers, Asashio and Arashio, were strafed but nothing else. This was another defensive success for the Japanese, but one that wouldn't last. With the distant American fleet, a second strike was put together. No fewer than 31 Dauntlesses from USS Enterprise, along with 12 Wildcats for 43 aircraft. Well, 46 technically. The 3 surviving Devastators from VT-6 were sent along as well. This time, the American aircraft arrived around noon on June 6th. At first, the dive bombers continued on to search for a Phantom battleship. However, as the Wildcats dropped down for a closer look, they identified the ships. Shattered Sword speculates that due to Mogami's crippled bow, American aviators mistook Mikuma for a battleship, instead of an otherwise identical sister ship. Either way, after a report about Mikuma being the battleship they were looking for, the Dauntlesses spun back. Mogami would be hit by 2 more bombs, though these did only medium damage. The more important note is what the attack did for Mikuma. Mogami had to slow and turn, forcing Mikuma to do the same. Her luck ran out as the cruiser was caught in this turn, and this time the American bombers would find their mark. The first bomb hit the roof of the 3rd turret directly ahead of the bridge. This shattered the turret and wounded or killed many bridge officers. The captain, Sakiyama, was critically wounded by shrapnel. 2 more bombs would wreck the starboard engine room, while a further 2 hit the aircraft deck, causing severe fires. Overall, Mikuma took 5 direct hits and at least 2 near misses. This would have been bad enough in its own right. The cruiser lurched to a halt as the Americans pulled back. Even with that damage, however, Mikuma looked salvageable. 2 engine rooms remained functional. She wasn't flooding. It seemed that Mogami or the destroyers could take her in tow at this point. It wasn't meant to be. Just before 2 p.m., the fires reached Mikuma's torpedoes. Several went up in a massive secondary explosion, which blew out Mikuma's bottom. The cruiser was doomed at this point. A blasted, flame-blackened wreck that quickly began to sink. The crew was ordered to abandon ship, with the unconscious captain sent off to Arashio in a raft. Unfortunately, the remainder of the crew would not be so lucky. As they leapt into the water, another attack came in. Around 2:45, 23 Dauntlesses from Hornet arrived, and at 3 p.m., they dove on Mikuma, Mogami, and Arashio. Both cruisers would be hit, along with the destroyer. Arashio lost steering after a hit where Mikuma's survivors were clustered. 37 of those men were killed, but the destroyer managed to escape. Mogami, meanwhile, took a hit near her sickbay that caused more severe fires. Those would be put out at the cost of the doctors and wounded. Mogami remained capable of sailing, however, and would depart with the destroyers. There was too much risk of further attack, so the flaming Mikuma was left behind. Only 240 men were rescued from the crew. The flaming hulk settled into the water, where 2 SBDs would be sent out to firmly identify the ship. They arrived at 5:15, taking many famous pictures of the crippled cruiser. They would then depart, leaving Mikuma to roll over and sink around 7:30 p.m. on June 6, 1942. 700 of the crew went down with the ship, when you include Captain Sakiyama, who died aboard Suzuya on June 13th. Mikuma has gone down in history as the first Japanese cruiser lost in the war, often overshadowed by the unfortunate way it occurred and not the heroic efforts by the crew to save their ship. Today, I hope the efforts of her largely lost crew are recognized. Thank you for watching. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy the content, and I'll see you in the next one.